My son forced me to serve his wife and said, "You live here for free, act like a maid." If I complained, he yelled, "Want respect? Go back to the nursing home." I left with whatever fit in my purse. 1 week later. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Alice, and at 67 years old, I never imagined I'd be scrubbing toilet bowls in my own son's house while being told I should be grateful for the privilege. "Alice, you missed a spot," Peyton called from the doorway, her manicured finger pointing at an invisible stain on the bathroom floor. My daughter-in-law stood there in her designer yoga pants, arms crossed, watching me like I was some incompetent maid she'd hired off the street. I looked up from where I knelt on the cold tile, my knees screaming in protest. "I just cleaned this whole bathroom, Peyton. It's spotless." She stepped closer, her perfectly highlighted hair catching the harsh bathroom light. "Don't take that tone with me. John and I work hard to keep this house running, and the least you can do is show some appreciation." Appreciation. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. For 2 years now, ever since I'd lost my apartment and had nowhere else to go, I'd been living in their guest room. What started as a temporary arrangement had slowly morphed into something else entirely. Something that made my skin crawl every time I thought about it too deeply. "I do appreciate it," I said quietly, struggling to my feet. My back ached from bending over the tub for the past hour. "I just think maybe we could discuss." "Discuss what?" John's voice boomed from behind Peyton. My son filled the doorway, his face already red with irritation. At 42, he'd developed his father's temper but none of his father's compassion. "You think you get to make demands here?" I turned to face him, my heart sinking. This was how it always went. Any attempt at conversation became a confrontation. Any request for basic dignity became an argument about gratitude. "I'm not making demands, sweetheart. I just thought maybe I could help in other ways. I used to be good at bookkeeping, and I noticed some of the bills on the counter." "Don't you dare touch our personal business," Peyton snapped, stepping between John and me like I was some kind of threat. "You're here because we're being charitable. Don't forget that." Charitable. I stared at her perfectly contoured face, remembering how different she'd been when she first met John. Back then, she'd called me the sweetest mother-in-law, and gushed about how lucky she was to marry into such a close-knit family. That version of Peyton had disappeared the moment I'd become financially dependent on them. "Mom," John said, his voice taking on that condescending tone that made my chest tighten. "We've been over this. You live here rent-free. You eat our food, use our utilities, sleep under our roof. The least you can do is contribute to the household." "I understand that, but nothing." He stepped closer, and I caught the smell of coffee and cologne that used to comfort me when he was small. Now it just reminded me of how much he'd changed. "You want to be treated like a guest? Go live somewhere else. You want to stay here? Then act like you're grateful for what you have." The words hung in the air between us. I felt something crack inside my chest, like a piece of my heart breaking off and falling into a place I'd never be able to reach again. "I am grateful," I whispered, hating how small my voice sounded. "But I'm also your mother." Peyton laughed, a sharp sound that echoed off the bathroom tiles. "Being his mother doesn't entitle you to special treatment. If anything, it means you should want to help without being asked." I looked at my son, searching his face for any trace of the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The one who'd cried when I had to work late and miss his baseball games. The one who'd promised at his father's funeral that he'd always take care of me. "John," I said softly, "do you remember when your father died? You held my hand at the funeral and told me we'd always be family. That we'd take care of each other." His jaw tightened. "That was different. You weren't living off us then. Living off them. Like I was some kind of parasite. Like the 20 years I'd spent raising him as a single mother after his father died meant nothing. Like the college tuition I'd paid by working 3 jobs was just a distant memory that didn't matter anymore." "I worked for 45 years, I said, my voice growing stronger despite the trembling in my hands. "I raised you and your sister alone. I sacrificed everything to make sure you had what you needed. And now you're old and we're taking care of you," John interrupted. "Just like millions of other families do. The difference is, most elderly parents don't complain about helping out around the house." The word elderly hit me like a slap. Not Mom. Not even Alice. Elderly. Like I was just some old woman who'd wandered into their lives and couldn't take a hint to leave. "I'm not complaining about helping," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm just asking to be treated with basic respect. To be talked to like a human being instead of..." "Instead of what?" Peyton's eyes glittered with something cruel. "Instead of someone who depends on us for everything? Because that's exactly what you are, Alice. You have no money, no apartment, no other options. So maybe instead of lecturing us about respect, you should focus on showing some gratitude." The silence that followed was deafening. John didn't contradict her. He didn't defend me. He just stood there, nodding slightly like she'd perfectly summed up my worth as a person. I looked around the bathroom I'd just spent an hour cleaning. At the expensive fixtures they'd installed with money from John's promotion. At the pile of designer towels that cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. Everything in this house screamed success and comfort, but none of it belonged to me. I was just the hired help who happened to share DNA with the owners. "You know what?" I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "You're absolutely right. I don't have other options. I don't have money or an apartment or anywhere else to go. But I do have something you seem to have forgotten." "What's that?" John asked, his tone mocking. "I have dignity. And I'm not going to let you take that away from me, too." I walked past them both, my head held high despite the tears threatening to spill over. Behind me, I heard Peyton whisper something to John, followed by his low chuckle. The sound of their shared amusement at my expense was the final straw. In my small room, I pulled out the battered suitcase I brought with me 2 years ago. My hands shook as I folded my few belongings, but my resolve grew stronger with each item I packed. A handful of photographs, the jewelry my late husband had given me, a few books, the small wooden box that held my most precious memories. It didn't take long. 2 years of living in their house and everything I owned still fit in one small bag. As I zipped up the suitcase, I heard their voices in the hallway. "She'll be back," Peyton was saying. "Where else is she going to go?" "Exactly," John replied. "She's just throwing a tantrum. Give her a few hours and she'll come crawling back, ready to apologize." I stood at the window, looking out at the street I'd called home for 2 years but had never really belonged to. They were probably right. At 67, with less than $300 in my checking account and no family except the son who just made it clear I was nothing more than a burden, where was I supposed to go? But as I stood there, clutching my suitcase handle, I realized something that surprised me. I'd rather face the unknown than spend one more day being treated like I was worthless. I walked out of that house without saying goodbye. John and Peyton were in the kitchen, probably already planning how to punish me when I inevitably returned with my tail between my legs. They had no idea I was never coming back. The Sunset Motel wasn't the kind of place I'd ever imagined spending a night, let alone what was starting to feel like an indefinite stay. The orange neon sign flickered weakly against the gray October sky, and the carpet in my room had stains I didn't want to think too hard about. But it was $45 a night, and it was all I could afford. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress staring at my phone. No missed calls. No text messages. It had been 3 days since I'd walked out of John's house, and the silence was deafening. Part of me had expected him to call within hours, maybe even apologize. I'd imagined him realizing how badly he'd treated me, showing up at my door with flowers and promises to do better. Instead, I got nothing. Not even a text asking if I was okay. My reflection in the cracked mirror across from the bed looked like a stranger. When had I gotten so thin? When had those lines around my eyes become so deep? The woman staring back at me looked fragile, defeated. Old. I pulled out my phone again and scrolled to John's number. My finger hovered over the call button for the 100th time that day. What would I even say? That I was sorry for standing up for myself? That I was ready to come back and scrub their toilets without complaint? The thought made my stomach turn. Instead, I found myself scrolling through old photos. There was John at 8 years old, grinning gap-toothed at his little league game. Me cheering in the stands, still wearing my nurse's uniform because I'd rushed straight from my shift. There was his high school graduation, where he'd thanked me in his speech for always believing in him. There was his wedding day, where he danced with me and whispered that I was the best mother in the world. When had everything changed? When had the boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers turned into a man who couldn't even check if his mother was alive? A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. For a wild moment my heart leaped. Maybe it was John. Maybe he'd finally come to his senses. But when I opened the door, it was just the motel manager, a tired-looking man in his 50s with kind eyes and worry lines etched deep around them. "Mrs. Henderson? I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to check on how you're doing. I noticed you've been here a few days and well." He glanced around the shabby hallway. This isn't exactly a place people usually stay long-term. I forced a smile, though I could feel it wavering at the edges. "I'm fine, thank you. Just between apartments." He nodded, but I could see he didn't believe me. I've been running this place for 15 years. I've seen a lot of people in tough situations. If you need help finding resources, social services, anything like that, I appreciate the offer, but I'm managing just fine. The lie felt heavy on my tongue. I wasn't managing anything. I was drowning one day at a time, watching my small savings account tick down toward zero while trying to figure out what came next. After he left, I walked to the small window and looked out at the parking lot. A few cars scattered around, most of them looking as worn down as I felt. In the distance I could see the city skyline, all those tall buildings full of people living their lives, going to work, coming home to families who wanted them there. I thought about calling my sister Margaret, but we hadn't spoken in months, and I knew she'd just tell me to swallow my pride and go back to John. She'd never understood why I couldn't just be grateful for what I had, even when what I had was slowly killing my spirit. The hunger pangs in my stomach reminded me I hadn't eaten since yesterday. I'd been rationing my money, trying to make it last as long as possible, but I was running out of ways to stretch $1. The vending machine in the lobby was my only option for dinner again, unless I wanted to walk 6 blocks to the nearest fast food place. As I counted out quarters for a package of crackers, my phone finally rang. My heart hammered as I saw John's name on the screen. "Hello." I answered promptly too quickly. "Mom." His voice was flat, businesslike. "We need to talk." "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so glad you called. I've been..." "Listen to me." He cut me off, and there was something cold in his tone that made my stomach clench. "Peyton and I have been discussing your situation, and we've decided we're willing to let you come back." Let me come back. Like I was a stray dog who'd wandered off. "But there are going to be conditions," he continued. "First, no more complaints about helping around the house. You'll do what you're asked when you're asked without argument. Second, you'll apologize to Peyton for the way you spoke to her. She's very hurt by your behavior." I gripped the phone tighter. "John, I just want us to treat each other with respect. I want to feel like family, not like..." "Like what, Mom? Like someone who's completely dependent on us? Because that's the reality here. You don't get to make demands when you're the one who needs help." The words hit me like a physical blow. This was my son, the child I'd rocked to sleep, nursed through fevers, cheered for at every soccer game and school play. The one I'd worked double shifts to buy Christmas presents for, who I'd tutored through math homework at the kitchen table until midnight. "I understand I'm dependent on you," I said quietly, "but that doesn't mean I deserve to be treated badly. No one's treating you badly. We're asking you to contribute to the household. Most people would be grateful for the opportunity." Grateful. There was that word again. "What if I can't come back under those conditions?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, John spoke, and his words fell like stones into my chest. "Then I guess you'll figure out where you really want to be. Because this is the only offer you're going to get from us." The line went dead. I stood there in the lobby of the Sunset Motel, holding my silent phone, surrounded by the smell of industrial disinfectant and the sound of traffic rushing past outside. Through the grimy window, I could see families in their cars, heading home to dinners and homework and bedtime stories. Normal families who loved each other without conditions. That night, lying on the lumpy mattress in the dark, I let myself cry for the first time since leaving John's house. Not just tears of sadness, but tears of mourning. I was grieving the relationship I'd thought I had with my son, the family I'd believed we were. I thought about his father, David, and how proud he'd been of John. How he'd worked 2 jobs to make sure we could afford a house in a good school district. How he'd coached John's baseball team even though he was exhausted from working construction all day. David had believed John would grow up to be a good man, a family man who understood the value of love and loyalty. If David could see us now, what would he think? Would he be disappointed in the son he'd been so proud of? Or would he be disappointed in me for failing to raise him better? As I drifted off to sleep, one thought kept circling through my mind. Maybe John was right. Maybe this was all I deserved. Maybe I really was just a burden that needed to be grateful for whatever scraps of kindness people threw my way. But deep down, in a place I was trying hard to ignore, another voice whispered something different. It whispered that I deserved better than this. That somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten my own worth. I just had no idea how to remember it again. By my 7th day at the Sunset Motel, I was down to my last $63 and facing a terrible choice. I could either pay for another night in this place or buy groceries that might last me 3 days if I was careful. The math was simple and devastating. I sat on the bed, surrounded by the few possessions I'd brought with me, trying to figure out my next move. The local newspaper lay open beside me, circled want ads for efficiency apartments that all required first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit I couldn't afford. Even the cheapest ones were asking for more money up front than I'd seen in months. That's when I noticed the corner of an envelope peeking out from beneath my jewelry box in the suitcase. I pulled it out, frowning. It was cream-colored paper, expensive looking, with my name written in elegant script across the front. I didn't remember packing it. The return address made my breath catch. Morrison, Blake & Associates, attorneys at law. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letterhead was formal, imposing, and the date was from just 3 months ago. How had I missed this? Then I remembered. It had arrived the same week Peyton had thrown that dinner party for John's colleagues. I'd been so busy helping her prepare, running errands and cleaning, that I'd simply stuffed the mail into my purse and forgotten about it. Dear Mrs. Henderson, we regret to inform you of the passing of Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield on March 15th. As per the terms of her last will and testament, you have been named as a beneficiary of her estate. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the details of your inheritance. We understand this may come as a surprise, as Mrs. Whitfield indicated you may not have maintained regular contact in recent years. She was your late husband's sister, and our records show she never married or had children of her own. Please bring proper identification and this letter when you visit our office. Sincerely, Richard Morrison Esq. I read the letter 3 times before the words began to make sense. Eleanor Whitfield, David's sister. I barely remembered her. A quiet woman who'd sent Christmas cards for a few years after David died, then gradually faded from our lives. I think I'd received a sympathy card from her when David passed, but that was almost 20 years ago. An inheritance. The word felt foreign, impossible. People like me didn't inherit things. We worked paycheck to paycheck, saved pennies in coffee cans, and worried about making rent. We didn't get mysterious letters from lawyers about money we'd never expected. But here it was in black and white. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number on the letterhead with shaking fingers. A professional female voice answered on the second ring. Morrison, Blake & Associates, how may I help you? This is Alice Henderson. I received a letter about an inheritance? From Eleanor Whitfield. Oh yes, Mrs. Henderson. We've been trying to reach you for months. Mr. Morrison has been handling Mrs. Whitfield's estate. Can you hold for just a moment? Before I could answer, I was transferred to a warm male voice that immediately put me at ease. Mrs. Henderson, thank you so much for calling. I'm Richard Morrison. I have to say, we were beginning to worry we'd never hear from you. I'm sorry, I only just found the letter. I've been going through some changes recently. Not to worry at all. These things happen. I wonder if you might be able to come into the office sometime this week? There are quite a few documents that require your signature, and frankly, the details are better discussed in person. My heart hammered against my ribs. Can you give me any idea what we're talking about? I mean, Eleanor and I barely knew each other. There was a pause, then a gentle chuckle. Mrs. Henderson, according to her will, your sister-in-law felt quite strongly about taking care of family. Apparently, she'd been following your life from a distance for many years. She left very specific instructions about her wishes for you. What kind of wishes? Well, there's a property involved. And some financial assets. I really think it would be better if we discuss this face to face. Would tomorrow afternoon work for you? Property. Financial assets. The words swirled in my head like they belonged in someone else's life. I managed to stammer out an agreement to meet at 2 o'clock the following day, then hung up and stared at the letter until the words blurred together. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of the motel around me. Doors slamming, cars starting, the occasional raised voice from the room next door, and tried to make sense of what was happening. Part of me was terrified to hope. What if it was some kind of mistake? What if Eleanor had left me a few $100s, or some old furniture I'd have to figure out how to sell? But another part of me, a part I'd buried under years of struggle and disappointment, whispered that maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. The next afternoon I stood outside Morrison, Blake and Associates, smoothing down my best dress and trying to calm my nerves. The building was intimidating, all glass and steel, with a lobby that probably cost more to decorate than I'd made in the past year. Richard Morrison turned out to be a kind-faced man in his 60s, with silver hair and the sort of gentle demeanor that made you want to trust him immediately. His office was lined with law books and family photos, and he offered me coffee and a comfortable chair before diving into the business at hand. Mrs. Henderson, before we begin, I want you to know that Eleanor Whitfield spoke about you often in her final years. She felt terrible about losing touch with your family after your husband passed away. I shifted uncomfortably. I barely remember her, to be honest. David didn't talk much about his family. She understood that. She told me she was shy, never knew how to reach out after David died. But she kept track of you through mutual acquaintances, Christmas card lists, that sort of thing. She knew about John's marriage, about your struggles after your husband's death. She even knew about your recent housing situation. My cheeks burned. She knew about that? Small towns have long memories, Mrs. Henderson. Eleanor heard through the grapevine that you were having difficulties. It actually influenced some of her final decisions about the will. He opened a thick folder and pulled out several documents. Eleanor owned a house in Millbrook, about 40 minutes from here. It's a small town, very quiet, but the house itself is quite lovely. Built in 1952, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms with a large garden. She lived there for over 30 years. He slid a photograph across the desk. The house was beautiful, white clapboard siding, green shutters, a wraparound porch with flower boxes under every window. It looked like something from a magazine, the kind of place where people raised families and grew old together. She's left this house to you, Mrs. Henderson. Free and clear. No mortgage, no liens. The taxes are current, and there's actually money set aside for maintenance and utilities. I stared at the photograph, afraid to touch it. This can't be right. She barely knew me. She knew enough. He pulled out another document. There's also a financial component. Eleanor was quite frugal throughout her life, and she invested wisely. She's left you the contents of her savings and investment accounts. The number on the paper in front of me had so many digits I had to count them twice. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more money than I'd ever imagined having. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Enough to never worry about rent or groceries, or whether I could afford my medications. I don't understand, I whispered. Why me? Why not some charity or... She was very clear about this, Mrs. Henderson. She said family should take care of family, and she regretted not doing more for you when David died. She considered this her way of making amends. I sat in that leather chair, staring at documents that represented a completely different life than the one I'd been living. A life where I didn't have to beg for a place to sleep or apologize for existing. A life where I could make my own choices and live with dignity. For the first time in years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed, hope. But even as Richard Morrison explained the details of transferring ownership and accessing the accounts, one thought kept nagging at the back of my mind. John didn't know about any of this. He had no idea that while he was deciding whether I deserved basic respect, I was inheriting a house and financial independence. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. The drive to Millbrook felt like traveling to another world. As I left the city behind, the landscape opened up into rolling hills dotted with farms and small houses tucked behind white picket fences. My rental car. The first time I'd driven anything nicer than a 15-year-old sedan in years. hummed quietly along the country roads. Richard Morrison had given me the keys to Eleanor's house 2 days ago, along with a stack of papers that still felt surreal in my hands. Property deed, bank statements, investment portfolios, all with my name on them now, all representing a life I'd never dared to imagine. But as I drove, something else was nagging at me. Something Richard had said during our meeting that I couldn't stop thinking about. She knew about your recent housing situation, he'd mentioned. But how? And more importantly, what exactly did she know? The house was even more beautiful in person. Set back from a quiet street lined with maple trees, it had the kind of charm that only comes from decades of careful tending. The garden was dormant for the season, but I could see the careful planning in the layout of flower beds and the mature fruit trees along the back fence. I stood on the front porch, key in hand, and took a deep breath. This was mine. Not through marriage or charity or someone else's grudging kindness. Mine because someone had thought I deserved it. The inside was like stepping into a warm hug. Eleanor had clearly been a woman of simple but elegant taste. Hardwood floors gleamed under braided rugs, and built-in bookshelves lined the living room walls. The kitchen was small but perfectly appointed, with windows that looked out over the back garden. Everything was clean and well-maintained, as if Eleanor had simply stepped out for groceries and would be back any moment. In the master bedroom, I found a cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Inside were photo albums, letters, and what looked like years of careful record-keeping. As I flipped through the albums, I began to understand how Eleanor had known so much about my life. There were photographs of David I'd never seen, him as a teenager, at his high school graduation, at his wedding to me. Eleanor had been there apparently, though I didn't remember her. There were newspaper clippings too, David's obituary, John's high school graduation announcement, even a small mention when I'd been recognized at the hospital where I'd worked for 20 years. She'd been keeping track of us all along, quietly collecting pieces of our lives like a devoted but distant relative. But it was the letters that made me sit down hard on the bed. They were drafts, dozens of them, written in Eleanor's careful handwriting. Letters to me that had never been sent. Dear Alice, one began, dated just 2 years ago. I saw in the church bulletin that you're living with John now. I hope you're happy there, but something about the way it was mentioned made me worry. I wish I knew how to reach out to you. I wish I'd been braver about staying in touch after David died. Another from 6 months ago. I drove by John's neighborhood today. Such beautiful houses. I saw you in the yard hanging laundry and you looked so thin. Are you eating enough? I wanted to stop, but I didn't know if I'd be welcome. I've been such a coward about family. And then the one that made my hands shake. Alice, I heard from Meredith at the post office that you've been asking about efficiency apartments. Are you leaving John's house? I can't stop thinking about this. If you need help, if you need somewhere to go, I have this big empty house and no one to share it with. But I don't know how to offer without seeming like a meddling old woman. The last letter was dated just a week before she died. Alice, I've made my decision. I can't reach out while I'm alive. I'm too set in my ways, too afraid of being rejected. But I can make sure you're taken care of after I'm gone. Family should take care of family. David would want this. I'm changing my will tomorrow. I sat surrounded by the evidence of 20 years of caring from a distance, 20 years of someone watching over me when I thought I was completely alone. Eleanor had seen what was happening to me, had recognized that I needed help, even when I'd been too proud or too beaten down to ask for it. But there was something else in the chest. A manila folder marked John Henderson Research. My stomach clenched as I opened it. Inside were printouts from social media, public records, even what looked like financial documents. Eleanor had been thorough. There were screenshots of John's Facebook posts about his promotions, his new house, his expensive vacations with Peyton. There were real estate records showing the value of his home, his salary information from public employee databases. And there was a handwritten note clipped to the front. Alice's son is doing very well financially. He doesn't need an inheritance. Alice does. But it was the last document that made my blood run cold. A copy of a conversation Eleanor had somehow obtained, maybe through mutual acquaintances, maybe through small-town gossip networks that never forget anything. It was dated just 3 months ago, and it was a conversation between John and his friend Marcus at their country club. Yeah, we've got Mom living with us now. John's words were transcribed in Eleanor's careful handwriting. It's actually working out pretty well. She takes care of all the housework, and it's not like she has anywhere else to go. Peyton was worried about having her around, but honestly, it's like having live-in help that we don't have to pay. Marcus apparently laughed and said something about free labor being the best kind. The funny thing is, John continued, she acts like we should be grateful to have her there. Like we owe her something because she's our mother. But what has she ever really given us? She worked, sure, but that was her job as a parent. Now it's our turn to be the responsible ones, and she should appreciate what we're doing for her. There was more, but I couldn't read it. My hands were shaking too badly, and my vision was blurred with tears of rage and heartbreak. This was what my son really thought of me. This was how he talked about me when I wasn't around. Not as his mother who'd sacrificed everything for him, but as free labor who should be grateful for the opportunity to serve. I thought about all those mornings I'd gotten up at 5 to make them breakfast before they left for work. All those evenings I'd spent cleaning their house while they watched television. All those times I'd bitten my tongue when Peyton spoke to me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. They hadn't been doing me a favor. I'd been doing them one. And they'd known it all along. I closed the folder and sat in Eleanor's peaceful bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of her kindness and John's cruelty. The contrast was stark and painful. A woman who barely knew me had cared enough to secure my future, while the son I'd raised and loved had seen me as nothing more than convenient help. For the first time since leaving John's house, I felt something other than sadness or fear. I felt anger. Pure, clean, righteous anger. John thought I was helpless. He thought I had no options, no resources, no way to survive without his grudging charity. He'd built his sense of power over me on the assumption that I was completely dependent on him. He had no idea how wrong he was. As the sun set over my new backyard, I made myself a cup of tea in my new kitchen and sat at my new table, planning what came next. John would find out about my inheritance eventually. Small towns had ways of spreading news, especially news this surprising. But he wouldn't find out from me. Not yet. First, I was going to get settled. I was going to make this house my home. I was going to learn how to live as an independent woman again. Not as someone's unwanted burden. And then when I was ready, when I was strong, I would let him know exactly what he'd lost when he decided I wasn't worth basic human decency. The thought of his face when he realized the truth was almost enough to make me smile. 3 weeks into my new life in Millbrook, I had established a routine that felt like pure luxury after years of walking on eggshells. I woke up when I wanted to, made coffee in my own kitchen, and spent my mornings tending to Eleanor's garden or reading in the sunroom she'd added to the back of the house. The neighbors had been welcoming in that careful way small-town people approached newcomers. Mrs. Peterson next door had brought over a casserole and stayed for tea, sharing stories about Eleanor that made me understand even more what a remarkable woman she'd been. The mailman, Harold, always waved and commented on how nice it was to see lights in the house again. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. But I knew this peaceful bubble couldn't last forever. Word travels fast in small towns, and it was only a matter of time before news of my inheritance reached the city. I'd been expecting it, actually. What I hadn't expected was for John to show up on my doorstep looking like he'd seen a ghost. I was repotting some of Eleanor's herbs on the front porch when his BMW pulled into my driveway. My hand stilled on the ceramic pot as I watched him get out of the car, his movements sharp and agitated. He was dressed in one of his expensive suits, but his hair was disheveled and his face was flushed. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, staring up at me like I was some kind of mirage. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, waving a piece of paper in his hand. I set down the small plant I'd been working with and brushed the soil off my hands. "Hello, John. It's nice to see you too. Don't give me that. I got a letter from some lawyer about Eleanor Whitfield's estate. They're saying you inherited her house." His voice was rising, attracting the attention of Mrs. Peterson, who was watering her flower boxes next door. "That's correct," I said calmly. "Would you like to come inside? Or would you prefer to have this conversation where the entire neighborhood can hear?" His jaw worked like he wanted to keep shouting, but he glanced around at the windows where curtains were beginning to twitch and climbed the steps. I led him into the living room, noting how his eyes swept over the comfortable furniture, the built-in bookshelves, the original hardwood floors. "This is impossible," he said, turning to face me. "You didn't even know this woman." Eleanor was your father's sister. She was family. Barely family. We met her maybe twice in my entire life. He began pacing, his hands clenched into fists. There has to be some mistake. People don't just leave houses to strangers. I sat down in Eleanor's favorite armchair, the one by the window that caught the afternoon light. There's no mistake, John. Eleanor left me this house and a considerable sum of money. The lawyers have all the paperwork. Money. The word came out as a croak. How much money? Enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. The color drained from his face. He sank down onto the sofa across from me. The letter from the lawyer crumpled in his white-knuckled grip. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. Why would she leave everything to you? She had other options. She could have left it to charity, or... He looked up at me with something desperate in his eyes. Or to me. I'm David's son. I should have inherited something. I studied my son's face, seeing for the first time the man he'd really become. Not the successful professional he liked to project, but someone who'd built his sense of security on controlling others. Someone who couldn't bear the thought that I might not need him anymore. Eleanor made her choice based on character, not genetics, I said quietly. Character. John laughed bitterly. What's that supposed to mean? I reached for the manila folder I'd brought from Eleanor's bedroom, the one with his name on it. It means she knew exactly what kind of person you are. His eyes fixed on the folder as I opened it, and I saw recognition flicker across his face when he spotted the screenshots and documents. She knew about the conversation you had with Marcus at your country club, I said, pulling out the transcribed notes. The one where you talked about how convenient it was to have me around as free labor. John's face went from pale to gray. You were just telling the truth, I finished for him. About how you really see me. About what I'm worth to you. I read from Eleanor's careful notes, watching my son flinch with every word. It's like having live-in help that we don't have to pay. That's what you said about your mother, John. The woman who worked 3 jobs to put you through college. I didn't mean it like that, he said weakly. Didn't you? I set the papers aside and looked at him directly. Because that's exactly how you treated me. Like hired help who should be grateful for the privilege of serving you. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, I saw something I hadn't seen in years: shame. I know I wasn't. I know things weren't perfect when you were living with us, he said slowly. But you have to understand, it was stressful having another person in the house. Peyton was dealing with a lot of pressure, and it was easier to take it out on me than to deal with your real problems, I interrupted. I understand perfectly, John. What I don't understand is how you convinced yourself I deserved it. His mouth opened and closed like he was trying to find words that would somehow make this right. But there weren't any words. We both knew that. The thing is, I continued, Eleanor saw what was happening. She saw a woman being mistreated by her own family, and she decided to do something about it. Even though she barely knew me, she cared more about my welfare than my own son did. That's not fair, John said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Eleanor had tended for 30 years. When was the last time you asked if I was happy, John? When was the last time you cared about my well-being, instead of what I could do for you? The silence stretched between us, heavy with 20 years of missed opportunities and unspoken resentments. I want you to leave now, I said finally, not turning around. Mom, wait. Maybe we can work something out. If you need help managing all this money, I could. No. I turned to face him, and whatever he saw in my expression made him take a step back. You had your chance to be my son, John. You chose to be my employer instead. Now you can live with that choice. You can't just cut me off. I'm your family. Family doesn't treat each other the way you treated me. Family doesn't humiliate and exploit the people they're supposed to love. I walked to the front door and opened it. Eleanor understood that. She gave me more love and respect in death than you ever did in life. John stood there for another moment, looking lost and confused, like the world had suddenly stopped making sense. Maybe it had for him. Maybe he'd built his understanding of our relationship on such a foundation of lies that the truth was genuinely shocking. What am I supposed to tell Peyton? He asked as he reached the door. Tell her whatever you want, I said. It's not my problem anymore. After he left, I sat back down in Eleanor's chair and watched his BMW disappear down the tree-lined street. Mrs. Peterson appeared at her mailbox a few minutes later, clearly hoping for some gossip about my visitor. Everything all right, dear? She called over. Everything's perfect. I called back and realized I meant it. For the first time in years, everything really was perfect. I had a home that belonged to me. I had financial security. I had neighbors who treated me with kindness and respect. And I had the knowledge that sometimes, when you think you're completely alone in the world, someone is watching over you. Someone who sees your worth even when your own family doesn't. That evening, I found Eleanor's final letter to me in the folder. This one hadn't been a draft. Dear Alice, it read. If you're reading this, then my plan worked, and you're safe in my house. I hope you'll be happy here. I hope you'll fill these rooms with laughter again, and maybe plant some flowers that bloom in colors I never dared to try. You deserve so much more than what you've been given. You deserve to be valued for who you are, not what you can provide for others. I'm sorry I waited too long to tell you that in person. Take care of yourself, my dear. You're worth taking care of. With love, Eleanor. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my jewelry box next to my wedding ring and the few pieces my grandmother had left me. Tomorrow, I would start planning what to do with Eleanor's generous gift. Maybe I'd travel. Maybe I'd take up painting again. Maybe I'd just enjoy the simple pleasure of drinking my morning coffee, without someone telling me I should be grateful for the privilege. But tonight I was content to sit in my own living room, in my own house, and savor the sweetness of being exactly where I belonged. 6 months had passed since John's visit, and autumn was painting Millbrook in shades of gold and crimson. I stood in my kitchen, kneading dough for the apple pie I planned to take to the church harvest festival, when I heard a car pull into my driveway. Through the window, I recognized the silver sedan that belonged to my neighbor Harold, but there was another figure with him. A woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes that looked out of place in our small town. Peyton. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to the front door, curious despite myself. Harold was walking toward his own house, but Peyton stood uncertainly by her car, looking around at the neighborhood like she'd landed on an alien planet. Alice, she called when she saw me. Her voice had lost that sharp edge I remembered, replaced by something that sounded almost desperate. Could I talk to you for a minute? I stepped onto the porch but didn't invite her in. What can I do for you, Peyton? She climbed the front steps slowly, her designer heels clicking against the wood. Up close, I could see the strain around her eyes, the careful makeup that couldn't quite hide how tired she looked. I wanted to apologize, she said, the words coming out in a rush, for how I treated you when you lived with us. I was wrong and I'm sorry. I studied her face, looking for signs of sincerity or calculation. What brought on this change of heart? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. John lost his job 3 weeks ago. Budget cuts, they said, but everyone knows it's because his work has been suffering. He's been drinking more, staying out late, and when he is home, he just sits in his office staring at his computer. I'm sorry to hear that, I said and realized I meant it. Not because I felt sorry for John, but because I felt sorry for the pain Peyton was clearly experiencing. The thing is, she continued, we were counting on his salary to make the mortgage payments on the house. We bought it right at the top of our budget, assuming he'd keep getting promoted. Now we're behind on everything: the mortgage, the car payments, credit cards. I waited, sensing there was more. John keeps talking about how unfair it is that you inherited all this money when we're the ones with real financial obligations. He thinks you should help us out, for family's sake. She paused, looking embarrassed. That's actually why I came here. He sent me to ask if you'd consider giving us a loan. The audacity of it took my breath away. After everything they'd put me through, after treating me like hired help and throwing me out when I dared to ask for respect, they wanted me to rescue them from their financial troubles. And what do you think, Peyton? I asked. Do you think I should give you money? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her expensive shoes. Honestly? No. I think we made our bed and now we have to lie in it. But John, he's not handling this well. He keeps saying you owe us because we took care of you for 2 years. Took care of me, I repeated slowly. Is that what you call it? No, she said quietly. That's what John calls it. Call it what it really was. We used you. We treated you terribly. And now we want to use you again. Her honesty surprised me. For the first time since I'd known her, Peyton seemed like a real person instead of a perfectly polished facade. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because living with John these past few months has shown me what you went through. The way he talks to me now when he's stressed, the way he expects me to handle everything while he wallows in self-pity. I understand now why you left. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I understand why you had to save yourself. I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that Peyton was finally seeing the truth about the man she'd married. I'm not going to give you money, I said gently. Even if I wanted to help, it wouldn't solve anything. John would just see it as proof that he can keep manipulating people to get what he wants. I know, she said. I told him you'd say no, but he insisted I try. She paused, then added, I think I'm going to leave him. Because of the money problems? Because of who he becomes when things don't go his way? Because of how he treated you, and how he's starting to treat me? She wiped her eyes carefully, trying not to smudge her makeup. I used to think I was better than you because I had money and status and a beautiful house. But you had something I didn't have: dignity. And you were brave enough to walk away when it mattered. I looked at this woman who had once made my life miserable, and saw someone who was finally understanding the difference between having things and having worth. It took me 67 years to learn that lesson, I said. You're still young enough to build a different kind of life. She nodded, straightening her shoulders. I should go. John's expecting me to come back with good news, and when I don't, be careful, I said, meaning it. If he's drinking more and getting angry, make sure you have somewhere safe to go. I will. Thank you, Alice, for everything. I know I don't deserve your kindness after how I treated you, but thank you. After she left, I went back to my pie making, but my hands were shaking slightly as I rolled out the dough. Not from fear or sadness, but from the strange satisfaction of seeing people finally face the consequences of their choices. That evening, I was reading in the sunroom when my phone rang. John's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. But curiosity got the better of me. Hello, John. Peyton said you won't help us. His voice was slurred, confirming what she'd said about the drinking. That's correct. How can you be so heartless? We're family. We're in trouble, and you're sitting there in your fancy house with more money than you know what to do with. I know exactly what to do with my money, I said calmly. I'm using it to live a life where people treat me with respect. This is all your fault, he said, his voice rising. If you hadn't been so selfish, if you'd just been grateful for what we gave you, none of this would have happened. I almost laughed at the twisted logic. So your job problems are my fault? Your financial irresponsibility is my fault? Your marriage issues are my fault? Everything was fine before you left. Peyton and I were happy, my work was going well. You destroyed everything. No, John. I just stopped enabling you to avoid dealing with your real problems. The difference is, I'm not there to blame anymore. There was a long silence, and when he spoke again, his voice was different. Smaller. More like the little boy I remembered. I don't know what to do, Mom. Everything's falling apart. For just a moment, my heart softened. This was my child, the baby I'd rocked to sleep and nursed through fevers. But then I remembered the man he'd chosen to become, and I hardened my resolve. Then figure it out, I said quietly. Like I had to when you threw me out with nowhere to go. Like I've been doing my whole life. But you're my mother. You're supposed to help me. I did help you, John. For 42 years I helped you. I sacrificed my own dreams, my own needs, my own happiness to make sure you had everything you wanted. And when I needed help, when I needed basic human decency, you decided I wasn't worth it. That's not. I never meant. Yes, you did. You meant every word, every dismissive gesture. Every time you made me feel like garbage for existing. You just never thought there would be consequences. I hung up before he could respond. Later that night, I stood in my garden under a sky full of stars, breathing in the cool autumn air. Eleanor's roses were dormant for the season, but I could see the careful pruning she'd done, preparing them to bloom again in the spring. That's what she'd done for me, really. She'd pruned away all the dead parts of my old life and given me the space to grow again. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment I thought it might be John again, but it was from Margaret, my sister. Heard about your inheritance through the grapevine. So happy for you. Would love to visit soon if you're up for it. I smiled, typing back a quick response inviting her for the following weekend. Margaret and I had our differences, but she'd never made me feel worthless. She'd never used my love against me. As I walked back toward my house, my beautiful, peaceful, welcoming house, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. Broken, desperate, convinced that I deserved whatever scraps of affection people were willing to throw my way. That woman was gone. In her place was someone who knew her own worth. Someone who wouldn't accept less than she deserved. Someone who had learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. I had everything I needed now. A home that belonged to me. Financial security. Neighbors who genuinely cared about my well-being. And most importantly, I had myself back. The woman I'd been before years of emotional abuse had convinced me I was worthless. John could keep his anger and his blame and his desperate need to make everyone else responsible for his failures. Peyton could figure out how to rebuild her life without using other people as stepping stones. I had my own life to live now, and I intended to make it beautiful.